like packages of carrots, our cherry tomatoes, our cilantro, all those things, they rarely carry a nutrition label. I have a friend who did her PhD in nutrition in India on food labeling, and she said that only 10% of what is in their food supply has a label. We're much more than that. So here is my first message, an introduction to food labels. First of all, you probably don't know, pardon me, is that this is a new label as of 2020. Most of the labels on the packages that we're purchasing had the old label, and some of the new labels were starting to show up. But of course, companies had time to print up and use the new label. And the biggest feature is to show that the calories are in large font. And that was in part recommended by other consumers and a lot of consumer advocates. The old label, the calories were, a reasonable font. Another thing about the nutrition label, although this one is sort of color coded for an educational purpose, the labels should all be very easy to read in a uniform font. So the one that's using here is kind of like Arial, sometimes in bold, sometimes in italics. Another thing about the information on the nutrition facts label is that it can't be in wacky colors. In other words, you can't have a green background with red print, because those colors are going to bounce around. It couldn't be in a font that was crazy script or uneven letters. So it made it as clear as possible. And if it was on a very colorful package, the nutrition label had to be as plain as possible. So if you had a package that had pictures of spaghetti sauce being poured across a dish of pasta, the nutrition label couldn't be superimposed on that. It had to be its own black and white label on that box. So we're going to start by looking at the information that says serving information. There we go. First one, serving size. So serving size, kind of straightforward. It means this is the size that you're going to be eating. Only here's how it gets, takes a little more attention. It's first of all supposed to be in a standard amount. So if I'm selling yogurt, or I'm selling canned peas, or I'm selling frozen broccoli, my serving size should be uniform across the products, not a half a cup here, 2/3 of a cup there, because that makes it hard for a consumer to compare. The serving size is also one of two things, which is servings per container. Excuse me, one sec. You guys can hear me okay, right? So I was trying to see if I needed to change my earbuds. We're good. So servings per container, because sometimes you'll eat something which is the whole container, and the information on the box or the bag is only referring to the specific serving size. So this also noted here in familiar units such as cups or pieces, and it's followed by the metric amount, which might confuse some consumers or might just look like too much information, but it's still useful. And it sort of reflects the average amount that people eat, not necessarily a recommended amount. One sec. So sorry for the interruption. Okay, so next page. And by the way, the information that I'm presenting you with comes from a website published by the Food and Drug Administration. And this particular label is representing frozen lasagna. Personally, I've never purchased frozen lasagna. And I'm not sure what a cup of frozen lasagna would look like. But this is important for us to know for context. Okay, so we just went through serving size. Now we're going to talk about calories. Once again, this is the amount per serving. And if anyone wants to define calories, it basically is a measure of energy. And this one reminds us again that if there are 4 calories per serving, and you eat I'm so sorry, 4 servings per container, and you eat the entire container, that could be an 11,120 calorie meal. This is even more tricky with beverages, where something like a bottle of Snapple may have 2 servings in a bottle, and the information will clearly say 2 servings. But when you drink it, it feels like it was just 1 bottle, so 1 serving. Let's go to the next one, nutrients. Now, all of the calories that are described in the previous one, 280, are contributed by fat, by carbohydrate, and by protein. But I think it's way too much information for a label to say how much fat made up the calories of the total. Technically, there are 9 calories per gram, so if you multiplied 9 by 9, that would give you part of the 280. There are 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate, so that's 4 times 34 plus that, and so on. So what you'll notice is that the old label used to say percent of calories from fat, but that's been eliminated. And I agree. I think it was kind of superfluous and not very applicable. So here we are. Calories, 9 grams of fat, 4.5 are saturated, 0 trans, pardon me, cholesterol, sodium, and carbohydrates. So let's go to fat first. And fat is everywhere. You will find most of the fat in our food supply in things that come from animals. So the fat of chicken, the fat of beef, the fat of eggs, the fat of milk and cheese, except for fat-free milk. And then you'll find fat in seeds and nuts, but there's very little fat, almost traced to unmeasurably low in vegetables and fruits. And you can see that most of the saturated fat in the food supply, I like to say in a simple way, comes from critters on 4 feet. Not all, but a fair amount. So the saturated fat of beef, the saturated fat, the fat in beef is about 47% saturated. The fat of butter, which ultimately comes from cream, which comes from milk, which comes from the cow, and we've noticed that cows have feet, or hooves, if you want to be technical. But you also get a lot of saturated fat from palm oil and coconut oil. This is not me declaring that any of those foods is unhealthy, but you won't expect a high number of grams of saturated fat on foods that are mostly plants unless they contain coconut or palm oil, or unless they're seeds or nuts. But the other foods like bologna, salami, hot dogs, eggs will have a larger number of total fat will come from saturated fat. So you see here that half of the fat in this frozen lasagna is saturated. Is that a big deal? Well, the American Heart Association and the recommendations for someone who has a high cholesterol level is that about 7% of your calories come from saturated fat. I would be on another planet if I didn't imagine each of you would be thinking, how many, 7%, how do I know what that number is? And for a lot of us, that's going to be somewhere between 14 and 16 grams a day. Now this, the recommendations for dietary guidelines for Americans suggest 10 grams of saturated fat a day, which is quite a bit lower. And if you ate a serving of this frozen lasagna, you're already hitting or really about to bump into the recommended amount of saturated fat a day. That doesn't mean that if you eat this and then add to that whole milk, and then put cream in your coffee, that you're headed for a heart attack. The dietary contribution of saturated fat to chronic disease is based on many other risk factors like smoking, like heart disease, like body weight. like having other conditions such as diabetes. So I don't want to bash saturated fat, but it's important to know that you can see how much saturated fat is in a portion. And then trans fat, there is no safe number for trans fat. Fortunately, this frozen pizza has 0. Excuse me. Now, most of the trans fat that you're going to find in the food supply will be in chips and cupcakes and cookies and sort of commercially baked things, not your good baked on premises stuff, but the kinds of things that come in packages that are going to be, that have to have an extended shelf life. And if I'm the person making the label, I don't want to have a number next to trans fat. You see here it's 0. That is the good number. But if my serving size of a food that I'm going to put a label on may have 1 gram of trans fat, I really might try to hide that. And the way I hide that is to make my serving size smaller. So that when your serving size, the trans fat is less than 1.5 or a half a gram, you can put that on your label as 0. And the itchy part of that is, let's suppose it is something like honey buns. We've seen those things in the store. It's like the junk food alley when you walk into a sandwich shop or a bodega. All those buns and Debbie's and Drake's things that are dangling, they will define a serving size as something small enough so that the trans fat number will be less than 0.5. But when you eat 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them, or you eat them frequently, your trans fat's going to go up. I wanted to also just say, we have a lot of foods that we know and dearly love, such as a charcuterie tray, which will have cheeses and cut meats, like deli meats. And I confess, when I walk through the aisle that has the chips and the popcorn, my eyes glaze over. So we are all pretty much, as human beings, we're drawn to fat. Our bodies somehow intuitively know that fat is a good source of energy and we need that. But we just need to be, selective. That's all. Let's talk about the next nutrient, which is cholesterol. Now I'm going to back up for a quick second. Nutrient, the definition of a nutrient means that it has to be provided by the body, by the diet, or else you will develop a deficiency of it. And that deficiency could ultimately lead to some kind of a compromised body function and you could die. Oops. So cholesterol is not really a nutrient in this case. It falls on the list in the food label under nutrients, but it isn't something that you have to have in your diet or else you'll have a deficiency of it, which could lead to death. It is something that is found in all animals. It's part of the membrane of our cells. So taking the skin off your chicken will not remove the cholesterol. It'll remove a fair amount of fat. Trimming the beef, trimming the visible fat, once again, cholesterol is found in the muscle as well as in the fat. So taking away the fat will not completely eliminate it. So how much cholesterol should we eat? American Heart Association says 300 milligrams per day for healthy Americans, and then 200 milligrams per day if someone has defined heart disease. And the dietary guidelines for Americans just say as little as possible. So to that end, if you're eating a mostly plant-based diet, you're probably not going to exceed 300 milligrams, because remember, most of the cholesterol in our diets is going to come from animals. And that's everything that breathes, everything that has the heartbeat. So beef, lamb, pork, fish, shellfish, cheese, butter, ice cream. Okay, ice cream doesn't have a heartbeat or breathe, but it's made of animal. Now, I think in my early training, it was always very absolute. Cholesterol is in animals and nowhere else. But in fact, plants can synthesize cholesterol too. Excuse me, but in very small amounts. So it doesn't add significantly at all to our human diets. And funny thing about cholesterol in plants is that It's often in a plant that has a symbiotic relationship. I hope you don't mind. This is my trivia departure for a moment. An animal that cannot make its own cholesterol will eat that plant and get the cholesterol from that, which just tells us once again, Mother Nature is amazing. Okay, so let's move on to the next on the list of nutrients, which is sodium. Now, sodium is a mineral. It is a nutrient. If you do not have sodium in your diet over a short period of time, you will have complications that could lead to death. Most of us, however, eat far more than we need. And the recommended amount of sodium per day is about 2,300 milligrams. A teaspoon of salt. Now, we're not talking if I open my drawer of silverware and I pull out the teaspoon compared to the soup spoon. That is not the one that is actually measures 5 cc's. So that teaspoon, which is the one I'm showing in the picture, will have about 2,100 milligrams of sodium a day. So if we're eating the recommended amount, it means that somewhere across the day, the amount of sodium will be equivalent to what's in a teaspoon. It will often be in a food because it was part of the processing of the food, or even in small amounts because it's naturally found in many foods in small amounts. So something like a half a cup of cooked carrots may have 60 milligrams of sodium, but that 60 is a long way from 2,300. Most of the sodium that's in processed foods is there not only for taste, but also for preservation. It helps to increase the shelf life of that food. So what other nutrient is on that list? Total carbohydrates. So this is another one you'd think, I thought carbs were just problematic. And once again, if you don't have enough of it during the lifespan, it could lead to complications. So it is a nutrient. And carbohydrate in this case is everything. It's called starches, fiber. So I know that when I was training, fiber was defined as something that was the indigestible bulk roughage of plants. So it is, but actually that roughage are made up of polymers of sugar, of glucose. So Margie, if you're there, we hear a dog barking. Is anyone aware of that? Can you mute in case it's your puppy? Okay. I mean, it's not making me crazy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I may have a different opinion. Okay.
I know. It was Jennifer, I think. So I just muted her.
We're cool. All right then. So we're talking about total carbohydrate, and that really is a big group of things: starches, fibers, and sugars. Now, you can actually make a case where a bowl of name a sugary, awful food like what's the one with the leprechaun? Lucky Charms. You could make a case that a bowl of Lucky Charms has less sugar than an apple. But that doesn't really mean that the Lucky Charms is good. It just means because total carbohydrate includes sugars and starches and fiber. Okay, next. Pardon me, the recommended amount of fiber ranges from 19 grams for women over 60 up to 30 grams for the general population. So if we ate this 1/4 of the package of frozen lasagna, we would be getting 4 of our 19 grams or up to the 30. I'm quite puzzled as to what the fiber source is in this frozen lasagna. I mean, if it has tomato sauce, I don't know what fibers are in a lasagna recipe. However, it's on the label, so one must hope it's accurate. Total sugars means the sugars that naturally occur as well as the sugars that might be added. Pardon? And added sugar is generally there to improve sweetness. I'm just going to do a couple of little tweaks about this added sugar story. On the left is a container of yogurt, which is plain yogurt, and on the right is a container of yogurt that is vanilla flavored. And you'll see total sugars on the left says 10 grams and includes 0 grams of added sugar, whereas on the right, total sugar says 21 grams, which includes 16 grams of added sugar. So what's happening on the left is that 10 grams is the lactose, which is naturally found in yogurt. And on the right, it's the lactose plus a sweetener, because vanilla yogurt needs to be sweet. Otherwise, we would just call it yogurt with flavoring. So that's why the added sugar is differentiated from total sugar. But all of that is a part of the total carbohydrate. So here's another example. I've often had people say, I'm trying to buy applesauce with no added sugar. But look at all the sugar in that applesauce. It's 11 grams. Excuse me, the takeaway is apples are sweet. And the sweetness of the apple is contributed by fructose and sucrose and glucose. But in this case, the company has not added any more sugar to make their product more tasty. But here's what happens, because you can see that that label that says total sugar is 11 grams, which is naturally what's in the apple, added sugar 0. The apple companies purchase apples of very specific varieties that have a slightly higher sweetness and a lower tartness than other apples, so that they can have a uniform flavor and optimal sweetness. Didn't say high sweetness, but just sort of optimal from one batch to another. And if sugar is added to an applesauce, it's usually because that applesauce might have been made from apples that were more tart. So it's really adjusting it, not necessarily trying to, like shove sugar at us every day. Excuse me. Now I'm going to move on to the next nutrition facts and information on a nutrient, which is protein. Oh, wait, when I play with sweetness, almost forgot I added this. So when we think about sweetness, I found this delightfully complicated diagram, which I said, I don't understand a thing on that page. So I'm putting it out there for exactly that purpose. Understanding what makes the human mouth and the brain respond to sweetness is very complicated. And in fact, there was a Nobel Prize given to, I can't remember his name. If you want me to, I can definitely find it, because of some of the understanding of the connections from the receptors in the mouth to the brain. And humans have a preference for sweetness. Some people have a bigger preference than others, but all humans prefer like sweetness. And then one of the things that the theory is that it led us to foods that were high in vitamin C. Now, vitamin C is not on the nutrition facts label as one of the nutrients, but it's one of the ones which, if you don't get enough of it over a period of time, there will be health complications that could lead to death. So I thought I would kick around the sweetness for a moment. I had a message on my screen that said my internet was unstable. Is everybody okay? We're clear? Okay. So I think when most of us were growing up in health taste regions, sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. And I think most of us were taught with a lot of insistence that the sweet was in the front, the bitter was in the back, which is why the phrase bitter aftertaste is what we use, and that the salty and the sour were on the sides. Well, that's a wrong map. Still hanging around, but it's wrong. excuse me, and the more correct map shows a fifth taste perception, which is called umami. It's considered kind of a protein type flavor, something that occurs when we eat mushrooms. Because you wouldn't eat a mushroom and say either bitter or salty or sour or sweet, but it's something about it still has an appeal. So there is this fifth and possibly more than five. And where they are in the mouth is inside the cheeks as well as on the tongue. So if for some reason you have a removable tongue and you forget one day to plug it in and you leave it home, you can still taste things. But if you have a removable tongue, we're going to be rich because we're going to go on all the talk shows. Now, that idea of sweetness means that some molecule stimulates the sweet receptors that are in the mouth. And they stimulate, excuse me, at different degrees of intensity. So the most intense sweetness is this artificial sweetener called aventane. I don't know where you find it. I think it's still something in research. Third one down says sucralose, and most of us know that that one is Splenda. Splenda is 600 times sweeter than sugar, what we call sucrose. So if I put a grain of sucrose on my tongue, I'm going to say that differently. If I put one pinch of sucralose, Splenda, on my tongue, it will taste as though I put 600 times that much of table sugar on my tongue. So that means you don't use very much of it when you use sucralose in your tea or coffee. I know a lot of people who see it when they go to the coffee shop and they sort of put a few packs in their pocket. I'm not judging. But when you see the Splenda or sucralose, when you pick up the pack, it's obviously got something in it. But since it's 600 times sweeter than regular sugar, most of what's in the pack is what we call a bulking agent. It isn't unsafe. It's just something that makes 1/600th of a sweetener feel bigger in the bag, in the little packet. Okay, so sodium saccharin, which everyone knows is sweet and low, is 300 times sweeter than sugar. Fructose. Well, aspartame is on the list, 200 times sweeter than sugar. That's the one we call equal. Fructose is a naturally occurring sugar in fruits and lots of other, here and there throughout the plant kingdom. And then there's regular sucrose, which is also found throughout plants. Excuse me, and pure glucose. So when we look at the information on added sugars on the label, it could well be a combination of regular sugar, regular sucrose, regular fructose. One of the things that's not on here is lactose, which is the sugar of milk. It's because lactose, if sucrose has let's say a number 1, lactose would be like 1/8. It's like so not sweet when you put it in your mouth, even though it's the same sugar. Okay. So you have lots of other things that contribute to what we call the sweetness of a food, but the added sugars that are on the label generally are referring to glucose, sucrose, and fructose as the added sugar. Okay, last nutrient on the nutrition facts label is protein. This is the nutrient that builds and rebuilds the body. This is the nutrient that helps to restore when you use our enzymes and our hormones and our white blood cells and red blood cells and muscles and hair and nails. And this 1/4 of a frozen lasagna gives us 15 grams of protein. Pretty cool. What is recommended on an average day? Well, there is a number. You can calculate. It would be your weight in kilograms times 0.8. But who wants to do math? This figure for a small adult, or it could be as much as somewhere in the neighborhood of 40, up to about 60. Now that's just a range, and it's kind of picking numbers that will apply to almost everyone. Worth of a frozen lasagna, you came pretty close to getting 1/4 of your day's protein. Mostly protein is much higher in foods of animal origin, so eggs, chicken, beef, basically because we're eating the muscle, as well as cheese, and also beans and nuts are really good sources of protein. Now, another thing on that nutrition label that deserves some attention is what is called the percent of daily value. So this is a reference amount that is based on a general goal for a healthy person who's eating about 2,000 calories a day. So if you ate that 1/4 of a frozen lasagna, you got about 12% of your daily total fat. If you ate that lasagna, you had about 12% of your recommended amount of total cholesterol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that you have to add these guys up and make it 100 as you go day to day, but it's a way to give you a gauge, pardon me, to see how your intake matches what is recommended. But what you'll notice is that there is no daily value for trans fat, because remember, that's a 0. And there's no daily value for total sugar, because there isn't a recommended amount of sugar. You can get sugar sweetness in from a lot of things. And the daily value for protein will vary by age, so those aren't added. In general, a daily value that is less than 5% of a nutrient per serving is considered low, and a daily value of above 20 is considered high. Not low to the point of saying dangerous or inferior, but if you were eating something like this one, nothing down here is under 5% except added sugars, which we don't need to worry about. You're not under eating, but you might pick up a potato chip bag, and all the numbers down here except for sodium are probably going to be small numbers, like not enough fiber, probably not very much cholesterol. So it's you can get a general understanding that a daily value of less than 5% or over 20 falls into that category. Okay, here's some more labels that are reasonably new to the food world. This dual column label, and the dual column label is there because, just the way we talked about it before, I might pick up a single package and eat the whole package, whereas the information on the package is referring to only 1/3 of the whole package. So in this case, it says if you eat 1 serving size, or a third, or if you eat all 3 servings in the container, or in this case, the entire package, this is the difference in what you'll be getting based on fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, and so on. I find that's useful, and I hope most other consumers do as well. That does rely on hoping people are reading it, though, right? Okay, next one is called the single ingredient label. So this is where you'll find this on something which doesn't have much of anything else, like a bag of sugar, or a bag of or a package of honey. This, in fact, is a honey label. There won't be enough protein or sodium or cholesterol to really yield anything, but it gives you a sense of what the major contributors are in that one food. In this case, the single ingredient sugars and syrups are labeled in this way, so it doesn't look like more sugars have been added, but these are the naturally occurring ones. You get it? So this, if you had a tablespoon of honey, it's got 17 grams of carbohydrate, and of that 17, it's all sugar. That's what we eat. That's why we love honey. But there's no significant fat or cholesterol or sodium or fiber or protein. Okay. So I think I'm almost out of the label chat. And now I just want to talk a little about the nutrition facts label. I'm going to talk a bit about what else is on the label. Are there any questions before we go to the other stuff. Speaking of dog, I hear my grand dog scratching at the door. She'll make it 15 more minutes. Scott, sorry. So here goes. When you pick up a label, the nutrition facts, of course, as a dietitian, that's the stuff that matters. But there's also information about the company. So the name and address of the company that produces the food should be there. There should also be all of the ingredients listed, and they're listed from the most to the least. The net weight should be there. So you're not looking at the weight of the package, the can or the bag, but just the contents. And if there's any allergenic ingredient, such as milk, soy, eggs, and in some cases nuts, that will also be on the label. And they're allowed to make health claims. So here's what the health claims look like. Oh, another labeling, packaging. Pardon, Kellogg's makes a case for how good their flakes are because they contain red berries. They are dried strawberries, but there are some knockoff cereals, and by knockoff I don't mean inferior, but simply lower priced and slightly different ingredients that use dried apples instead of dried strawberries. And when they're dehydrated and in little bits, they could look like a strawberry, and then they're dyed pink. So if you look on the ingredients, you should see dried apples and not dried strawberries. It doesn't mean someone's misrepresenting it, because it has to be listed as a dried apple. In the outside chance you're allergic to apple, but you're not allergic to strawberry, then you want to see that in the ingredients label. The packaging for us as consumers probably isn't a big deal, but if you're in the competitive market, you want your package to stand out. One sec. So if I come out with this cute little bottle with a tight neck and a nice flat lid, I think it's going to distinguish my orange juice from everybody else's. And sure enough, 3 months later, everybody else comes out with a bottle that has a very similar shape. And now my what I thought was my marketing advantage is gone. So in fact, Coca-Cola sued Florida's Natural over the shape of the bottle. I think that was in 2002. Don't quote me, but it was 2005. And I think they won. And as you can see, the citrus world owns Florida's Natural. Coca-Cola owns Simply Orange, and Pepsi-Cola owns Tropicana. So if anybody is shopping and you walk over to the refrigerated section of a local sandwich shop, are you going to distinguish by brand name or by the shape of the bottle? I'm just curious. I usually distinguish by price because I totally own it. I'm very frugal. Okay. So let's go to those health claims. First of all, excuse me, there have been a lot of claims that have been sued. Companies have been sued by the Federal Trade Commission because of misrepresented benefits. So Honey Nut Cheerios says this can help lower your cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease. It's not the Cheerios, it's the soluble fiber, but it's in Cheerios. So the health claims have to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. They have to have been proven by federally funded research. There are 12 claims that can be made for foods and 2 that can be made for supplements. Pardon, here they are. I think I narrowed it down to just the 10, but does this make your head swim? So claims linking folic acid with reduction in neural tube defects. This is a big deal as a birth defect because most of the damage that may occurs before a woman knows she's pregnant, so she wouldn't have prophylactically had lots of folic acid presented. But if the food supply has a folic acid source and it's something that you're eating all the time, then it's protective. Psyllium, reduce the risk of heart disease. Sugar, alcohols, reduce the risk of dental caries. Because remember, that sweetens, but it isn't eaten by the bacteria that live in the mouth. Olive oil, cholesterol lowering, soybeans, enhanced drug detoxification. I don't think I've ever seen that one, but it's an allowed claim. Anti-inflammatory, and I think most of us know about these. Antimicrobial, anti-estrogenic, and anti-proliferative. So I had to pause and say that anti-proliferative is kind of a mystery. It's true for oranges, green tea, and garlic. And here, pardon me, is what proliferative refers to. If I took an onion and I extracted from that onion some particular chemicals called quercetin, myristicin, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last one. I'll leave that to you. Now, I apply that to a cell culture of very specific tumor cells. It turns out that the products that came out of that onion extract prevented the cells from proliferating. So it's anti-tumor activity. Pretty cool, huh? I want to go back up. So that would be true for green tea, garlic. The claim can be made for oranges, green tea, and garlic. Okay, so the Federal Trade Commission, because of health claims that could not be supported, and I quote here, slapped for exaggerated claims in June of 2010. And this is an article that was from NPR, the Rice Krispies Company. Excuse me. Remember, their goal is to distinguish their cereal from everybody else on the shelf, make it look better. So now it can enhance and support your child's immunity. So they had to change that box. One more set of things that are allowed in the store are called functional foods. And a functional food means that you took a basic food and you added something to it that now makes it perform in a way that the original food never would have. So if I put calcium in orange juice, you now have a higher calcium intake, where most of the time calcium is going to come from milk and yogurt, leafy vegetables. But if I add it to orange juice, it's now a functional food. This thing called stanols. These are useful to help decrease how much cholesterol you absorb from the meal. And that's considered a functional food if I have added stanols to something that never had it. I'm not in a hurry to get soft chews with extra stanol. Somehow that seems like the wrong combo. But there are margarine products and crackers that have had some of these things added. So in case you're thinking, and you have a devious thought, that why don't I take a really bad food? Let's think of, I can't think of a really bad one because somehow you can almost always say something redeeming. But let's just take jelly beans. We know jelly beans are just sugar and gelatin and color and flavor. Okay, so essentially what these two paragraphs are telling us is that I can't take a really bad food and make a claim on it that it sounds like it works, but the food disproportionately has negative properties. So they get around the restrictions. A company can do a structure function claim, meaning I have natural soluble fiber in my food, even though I've also added a ton of crazy sugar and a ton of crazy fat. So I just want you to see that there are rules about what health claims can be made. Some companies manage to put legit claims on their label, but that doesn't make their food healthy. It just means that they manage to have it fit between the lines. Now, when we're in the grocery store, we're suckers for a lot of ploys to get us to buy. I have found living in New York City, because many grocery stores were some other structure or some other unit before they became grocery stores. Whereas if you go someplace where a store is actually constructed from the ground up and it has all these very specific regions of the store for frozen, regions of the store for um, slowing you down as you turn the aisle, that's where most of these kinds of marketing strategies work. But for example, if you move an ingredient from the floor to waist high, you will increase sales by 400 to 500%. So if there's something that you're going to the store and you know what you want and you know where to find it, it's probably way down here, because you don't know, the store knows you're going to look for it. Whereas something which is new and perhaps um, fresh off the factory line is going to be at eye level or waist level to kind of draw your attention. The design of the store increases impulse buying by having little things dangling. You can also get the money saving stamps, the coupons, you insert your phone number or use your club card. The biggest one that always gets us, I don't care how careful and clever you are, when it ends with 9, it's $2.99. It's $3, but somehow that 2 seems to hang on to in our minds. Okay, so be aware that supermarkets have, and this is a very short list of what their marketing techniques are. One of them that's also important, while it isn't necessarily a marketing technique, is to make sure we understand unit pricing. So I'm going back to yogurt for a second. If you buy a 32-ounce low-fat yogurt for $1.62, I know, like, when and where was that yogurt on the shelf? But this is a good picture that I got. The unit price is 5 cents an ounce, whereas you buy a 6-ounce container of the same yogurt, hypothetically, it's 12 cents an ounce, from 5 cents to 12 cents an ounce. Maybe you'll say, but I only have 85 cents in my pocket, so I can't buy the big one. Or why buy the big one and I have to carry it around, or it goes in my refrigerator, it goes bad. All of those are very much your own wisdom, but it's important to know that unit price. Here is one from Target, pardon me, our local Target, where it says that if you buy this size, it's $2.79. It makes it sound like, wow, look at that big sign. That's good. But it's actually $5.58 a pound. Whereas the larger one is $4.79 a pound. But I think this is what's drawing us, and it looks like, oh, that's a much better deal. So once again, caution to serving size or unit cost. This is not something you eat, I hope, but I found it quite interesting. I looked this one up independent of an existing teaching tool. Margie, it looks like we've lost some of the people from today's meeting, but if I bought a container of Dawn for 38 ounces at $7.99, that's 21 cents an ounce. Whereas if I bought an 8-ounce container of Gain for 97 cents, that's 12 cents an ounce. So this is actually cheaper and smaller, and usually the smallers are more expensive. Another one with checking the unit price. Down here it says that it's $3.14 a pound at 98 cents a pound, and therefore it's a $3.08 package. I think these numbers are also probably double by now, but it's not just the final number, but that one. And I think I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. If you are saving money, this is our consumer wisdom. Coupons help. My favorite is the 10% off day for senior citizens. Prepackaged items often cost more. You can compare prices between stores, but then you may find yourself wearing out your shoes trying to go and look at all the different ones. When we shop, we want to remember some very important food safety things. Everything we handle, we need to wash our hands sooner or later. Whether you're don't have to wash off your grocery cart, but when you come home, remember your surfaces should be washed. You should wash your knives, your cutting board, things like that. Another thing is, pardon me, there's a lot of words there, but I'm going to move on. Especially when we have so many reusable grocery bags, it's possible for some of contamination to stay in a bag. So it's a good idea to keep your bags always in a well-aired area, not folded up tight and put in a dark area. Washing them out as thoroughly as you can before putting them away. Next one on this one is when you do get your groceries home, to make sure you separate. And things that are raw meat, anything that's, as I say, packaged in the section of the grocery store where they handle the dead animals. I'm sure they have good hygiene practices, but when I get it home, I like to put it in something else so that that doesn't touch any of the things in the refrigerator or any of the things on the counter. So cleaning and separating is really very important, both in your house and in your supermarket cart. And I think we can stop here and take any questions. I see that I think we're down to a small group, but I'm more than happy to chat anybody up and see if I don't see anything in the chat here on Zoom. And Margie seems to have needed to take care of something. So we're between Linda and Jennifer. Any questions? I know that Margie can send copies to this to anyone who wants one, and they will also put it on YouTube.
I just want to thank you, Maudene, for doing your usual great job. I appreciate that. And I wish your cough would go away.
Oh God, do I wish more than you?
Oh, I can only imagine.
Today I didn't take any Sudafed, and I was so sure I had it all down to minimum, but it still snuck up on me. But thank you, I appreciate your concern.
I want you to be well. I would miss you.
Me too, and I love your classes so much. It's such a gift just being with you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Maudene. An excellent class as always. And thank you for the presentation on label reading, because my daughter and I went to Food Town and we did some comparison shopping. And you know that diamond crystal salt? We used to use that years ago. And years ago, diamond crystal salt had 390 milligrams of sodium. So as I was buying, I noticed it was creeping up to 430 milligrams. And the last time we went to Food Town, we went up to 590 milligrams. I told my daughter, I said, let me tell you something now. And she's 47 years old. And my granddaughter, who's 20, I said, you better read your labels. I said, because there's a few things there's a hidden agenda on these few things that's going on. Number one, the increase in sodium and sugar intake will make you sick. Number two, big pharma's making billions of dollars off of sick people. Number three, the medical field is a business. All this is a business. I said, read your label. If you want to stay healthy, read those labels, stay out of the hospital, stay away from the medications, because this is what they're doing. Really, this is what they're doing. So
I will not disagree.
And another thing, and I'm gonna let you go. I had bought a box of cookies from Aldi's. A perfect example here. It was really good. It was really tasty. So I said, let me look at the ingredients. I saw one ingredient that stood out, and it was ammonium in it. You know what ammonium is? It's an ingredient that makes your household cleaner, which is ammonia. I said, yes, it is. If you put these, I say, if there's chemicals, if there's ingredients in your food that you cannot pronounce, don't eat it. If you see any ingredients in it, because a lot of them have ingredients that's in your household cleaners that are carcinogens. They are carcinogens. Read your labels. Stay away from it.
Yep.
Yes.
Good advice.
I just want excellent advice. I would not refute any of that. I would go 100% right with you.
Thank you.
It has over here that a serving size on diamond crystal salt is 1/4 of a teaspoon. Now, that makes sense, because I've said that 1 teaspoon has about 2,100. So that would be 4 times my math. Okay. 4 times 54. I can't imagine when you said it used to be lower. I wonder if they used 1/8 of a teaspoon serving size.
I don't know. It used to be years ago when my grandmother was using it was very low. Because we was always taught by my mom and dad to read labels.
Yeah.
It was really low, but then as years go by, as I was looking at it, it started creeping up. And then it was like a month or two ago, my daughter and I was in Food Town on West 231st Street, Broadway. We looked at that diamond crystal, what up to 500 milligrams. I said, what the heck is this?
But I think it's the serving size. It's not the salt, the sodium.
No, it's not
higher.
It's a quarter of a teaspoon.
It's a teaspoon, but I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
still creeping. It's still creeping up.
It is.
I'm challenged to find out why that happened.
Well, I
I have
know
Yeah.
when
Well, I have an
bake,
old box. I have an old box here of the diamond. I said I'm going to save it, which is
Yes.
430 milligrams. I'm going to go there and buy another one just so I can prove a point.
Yeah. Do you have
What
it?
I'm talking
Can you
about.
show it to me now on Zoom?
You made a 430 milligrams?
Show me the side of the box. Anybody else
Okay.
curious?
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
well, she's getting that when I bake,
Yeah.
I always put less salt and less sugar than what they say, and nobody has ever said anything. to me.
Nobody will ever complain, right?
Right. And I also
was-
try to use some pot whole wheat flour as well.
Well, same here.
Oh, good.
We had a little friend, 8-year-old, and her mom came over for brunch on Saturday. Don't let it sound like I do these lavish brunches. But we were talking the difference between a muffin and a cupcake. And I said, nowadays they're the same. When you go into
Yeah.
the shop, they're sweet and they're buttery and they're fatty. I said, but when I was growing up, muffins were like bread
Right.
in a muffin tin. So then she was saying, well, what's the difference between a cookie and a muffin? I said, well, the cookie and the muffin, let's say in the muffin.
Let me see if I can show it to you.
Okay. I said the cookie,
If I can,
half the flour ran away and left the butter by himself.
Very well put. I like that.
Okay, I'm looking. Okay. Now the nutrition label, I see the iodized.
oh, wait a minute. You want to see the if I can get
The
to it,
label.
because sometimes the label,
Yeah.
here it is.
So turn it around to the nutrition facts label. Keep turning. So that's the red box. I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'll look it up myself too, and I'll send Margie an answer. And I don't think the difference between iodized and not iodized should make that much difference in the sodium. But I'll check, because iodized will take up some of the space in that 1/4 of a teaspoon.
It might have, because like I said, and when you go into the stores, you might find generic brands. There's a generic brand that looks just like Diamond Crystal in Food Town that has the same thing, 500 milligrams. You got that other one called Morton's, I think it is. That's 500 milligrams. That Morton, let me see what it says here. It says 1/4 teaspoon.
Right.
Which is, you're right.
Another thing
It's
I was
400
going to say about sodium. By the way, does anybody ever notice the difference that these are the same shape, essentially, that it really was a court case? I think that's amazing.
No.
That's hilarious.
It's been
I guess
fun, but I gotta go. Bye-bye.
Oh, okay then.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. The thing I wanted to mention about salt was, come on, there. So we see these Himalayan pink salt, and we see sea salt, but the sodium content is almost the same for 1/4 of a teaspoon in all of them.
Yeah, it's a 1/4. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a huge advantage of, I'd say the taste is better if you use less of it because it's more expensive or whatever the reason. But I think.
Yeah, but that's still a lot. That's still a lot.
It's a
1/4
lot.
is still a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, that's okay. So